Can I admit something that makes me sound like a terrible wife? Sometimes I don't fall asleep because of my husband's snoring. I stay awake because my brain decides that 2 o'clock in the morning is the perfect time to remember every uncomfortable conversation I've had in the last 15 years. His snoring is just the soundtrack. He's asleep. Completely asleep. The kind of asleep where nothing on earth could possibly bother him. If the ceiling collapsed, he'd probably roll over, mumble something that doesn't exist in any human language, and continue snoring. Meanwhile, I'm lying there staring at the ceiling like I'm preparing for a final exam in a subject nobody warned me about. Somewhere between 40 and 50, something very strange happens to a woman's nightstand. When I was 25, there was hand cream, a novel I never finished, maybe perfume. Now, reading glasses, lip balm, a charger, a bottle of magnesium, sometimes melatonin, sometimes vitamins, and earplugs. Yes, earplugs. Nobody tells you that one day you'll actually become the kind of woman who owns 3 different brands of earplugs because each pair promises superior comfort. Apparently, my 20s were much more optimistic than my 40s. The funny part? Tonight, I didn't even use them. Not because he suddenly stopped snoring. Oh no, he's performing a full live concert over there. Tonight, my mind was simply louder. Much louder. Because yesterday, I accidentally overheard a conversation that has been following me around ever since. It happened after a community event. Nothing special. Coffee, paper cups, cheap cookies that somehow always taste exactly the same. I wasn't even part of the conversation. I was looking for my phone charger. 3 women were standing nearby. Older than me, maybe late 60s, maybe early 70s. One of them laughed and said, "You know what I miss most about my husband?" The other 2 looked at her. She smiled. "My sleep." Everybody laughed. Even I smiled. Because, well, that's funny. Then she added something that nobody laughed at. I loved him very much, but I honestly forgot what it felt like to sleep through the whole night. Nobody spoke. She wasn't complaining. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She was simply remembering. And somehow, that sentence found a permanent place inside my head. Maybe because I suddenly imagined my own future. Maybe because I looked at my husband differently that evening. Maybe because I realized that love and sleep have been negotiating with each other for thousands of years. Or maybe because for the first time in my life, I completely understood why, centuries ago, wealthy couples often had separate bedrooms. Back then I used to think, well, that's not romantic. Now I think, I know, some of you are already thinking, just wear the earplugs. Believe me, I've tried. I've tried the expensive ones, the cheap ones, the soft silicone ones that promise to change your life. One pair was so uncomfortable, I woke up convinced someone had tried to plug my brain. Another pair disappeared every single night. I still have no idea where they go. There's probably an entire civilization living under my bed, surviving on missing socks, hair ties, and my earplugs. But here's the thing. Even when I block out the snoring, I can't block out my own thoughts. That's the real noise. And lately, they've become very chatty. Maybe it's age, maybe it's hormones, maybe it's because women spend half their lives pretending they're fine. Then bedtime comes, and suddenly every unfinished emotion lines up outside your bedroom door, like customers waiting for a store to open. Remember what your sister said? Let's replay that. What about that awkward thing you said at lunch 3 weeks ago? Oh, and don't forget to worry about your cholesterol. Wonderful. Thank you, brain. Exactly what I wanted at 2:17 in the morning. I turned over. He was still asleep, one arm hanging off the bed, completely relaxed. Men have this incredible gift. They can have an argument at 7 o'clock, fall asleep at 10, and wake up acting like the emotional hard drive has already been emptied. Women? We don't delete, we archive. With folders, subfolders, backups, cloud storage, and occasionally we reopen files nobody asked for. I looked at him and whispered, "You have absolutely no idea what's happening in my head right now." He answered with a snore that somehow sounded confident. I almost laughed. Then I remembered those women again, especially the one who had smiled when she said she missed sleeping through the night. She didn't sound bitter. She sounded peaceful, like someone who had finally stopped fighting reality. And I kept wondering, did she spend 30 years lying awake, listening to the same man breathe? Did she spend decades nudging him, rolling him onto his side, threatening divorce at 3 a.m. over a sound he couldn't even hear himself making? Because if you ask any married woman what true love is, she'll probably tell you it's not butterflies. It's deciding not to smother someone with a pillow at 3:04 a.m. For legal reasons, that was a joke. Mostly. I smiled into the darkness. Then another thought hit me. Maybe the snoring wasn't actually the problem. Maybe it had simply become the background music to a much bigger conversation I'd been avoiding with myself. Because lately, I hadn't just been losing sleep. I'd been losing something much harder to name. The strange part is, nothing was actually wrong. That's what made it so confusing. My husband wasn't a bad husband. He wasn't distant. He wasn't mean. He still kissed me goodbye in the morning, still asked if I wanted coffee, still remembered that I hate cilantro for reasons I can't even explain. He loved me. I knew that. And I loved him. So why did I suddenly feel restless? Not unhappy, just crowded. Have you ever felt that? Like your own life is so full of other people's needs that your thoughts have to wait in line? I don't think it happens overnight. I think it happens one tiny compromise at a time. One dinner you didn't really want to go to. One, it's okay, when it wasn't. One, whatever you want, because you were too tired to have an opinion. One, I'm fine. Then another, and another, until one day, you honestly can't remember what you wanted before everyone else needed something. I don't even think men do this on purpose. Most of the time, they don't even know it's happening. Because women are incredibly good at making invisible work look effortless. We remember birthdays. We remember medications. We remember which child suddenly hates tomatoes this week. We remember the dog's vet appointment. We remember that his mother likes the blue coffee mug instead of the white one. We remember everything. And somehow, we're expected to remember ourselves too. That's the difficult part. The older woman from yesterday came back into my mind. Not because of what she said, because of what she didn't. She never blamed her husband, not once. She simply admitted something that sounded almost forbidden. I miss sleeping through the night. Such a simple sentence, but hidden inside it, there were 30 or 40 years of marriage, thousands of nights, thousands of tiny sacrifices that nobody applauds because that's just called being married. I suddenly wondered, what have I quietly accepted over the years without ever noticing? Not because anyone forced me, because that's what women do. We adjust. We adapt. We make room. Then we make a little more room. Then a little more. Until one day, we wake up wondering why we feel like guests inside our own routines. That thought hit me much harder than the snoring ever could. Because the truth is, I wasn't lying awake because of the noise. I was lying awake because silence had finally given my own thoughts permission to speak. And once they started talking, they had a lot to say. You know what nobody tells you about getting older? One day, you stop arguing about the big things. You learn which battles aren't worth having. You become wiser, more patient, more diplomatic. Congratulations! Now you're arguing with yourself instead. I caught myself doing it all the time. I shouldn't be annoyed. He's not doing it on purpose. There are people with real problems. At least he's home. At least he's healthy. At least... Isn't it amazing how women can invalidate their own feelings faster than anyone else? We don't even need help. We do it ourselves. Imagine saying to your best friend, I know you're exhausted, but someone else has it worse, so your feelings don't count. You'd never do that. But somehow, we're perfectly comfortable saying it to ourselves. Every single day. I turned over again. He made that little snorting sound that always comes right before the full orchestra starts. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, opened them again. Nope, still awake. Then I remembered something that made me laugh. Years ago, before we got married, he stayed over at my apartment for the first time. The next morning, he looked at me and said, I barely slept. I felt terrible. Oh no, was my mattress uncomfortable? He looked embarrassed. No. You talk in your sleep. I what? You had a full conversation with someone. No, I didn't. Oh, yes, you did. What did I say? He thought for a second. You said, that's absolutely not how we're doing it. Then you paused, pointed at absolutely nothing, and said, give me the blue one. I stared at him. I don't even own a blue one. I know. We laughed so hard we almost cried. Apparently, I've always been difficult, even unconscious. So maybe this whole marriage has been balanced from the beginning. He snores. I negotiate with imaginary people at 3 a.m. Fair enough. That memory softened something inside me, because that's what memories do. They quietly remind us that the person currently driving us crazy is often the same person who once made us laugh so hard we couldn't breathe. Funny how the brain works. 1 minute you're mentally writing a criminal investigation called The Mysterious Death of My Husband Caused by Excessive Snoring. The next, you're remembering the man who spent 20 minutes looking for your favorite chocolate because you'd had a terrible day. Love is strange. It doesn't erase irritation. It simply learns to live next to it. And maybe that's much more realistic than butterflies. Because butterflies eventually disappear. Someone buying your favorite chocolate after 20 years? That's a different kind of romance. Still, none of this explained why I couldn't stop thinking about those women. Especially one sentence. Not the part about sleeping, the part she said afterward. Very quietly, almost to herself. I wish I had taken better care of myself while I still had the chance. That sentence followed me home. That sentence stayed with me all day. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. The kind of ordinary that sneaks into your life without asking permission. I wish I had taken better care of myself. She didn't say she regretted getting married. She didn't say she regretted having children. She didn't say she regretted loving people. She regretted disappearing a little at a time. And that hit me harder than I expected. Because if you'd asked me yesterday, do you take care of yourself? I would have answered immediately. Of course. I go to my annual checkups. I try to eat reasonably well. I even joined a gym. Do I go as often as I should? Let's not ruin a perfectly good story with unnecessary honesty. But I try. I drink water, sometimes. I buy vitamins. Whether I remember to take them is an entirely different department. So yes, technically, I'm taking care of myself. Or am I? Because health isn't only blood tests and vitamins. It's sleep. It's peace. It's allowing yourself to rest without feeling guilty. It's admitting you're exhausted before your body starts screaming louder than your own thoughts. Women are fascinating creatures. We'll remind everyone else to drink water. We'll schedule appointments for everyone else. We'll tell our friends, you really need to slow down. Then we'll survive on 4 hours of sleep, 2 cups of coffee, and pure determination, and call it being productive. It's almost funny. Almost. Somewhere along the way, we started wearing exhaustion like a medal. I'm so busy. I barely slept. I've been running all day. As if being completely worn out somehow proves we matter. I don't know who invented that competition, but I'd like to politely resign. Actually, not politely. I'd like to dramatically throw my imaginary resignation letter onto the table and announce, I would now like 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep and 1 entire day where nobody needs anything from me. Then I'd probably feel guilty after 20 minutes, because that's another thing nobody prepares you for. Women don't just carry responsibilities, we carry guilt. Guilt if we work too much, guilt if we don't, guilt if we cook, guilt if we order takeout, guilt if we spend money on ourselves, guilt if we don't answer a text message fast enough. Honestly, if guilt burned calories, I'd have abs. I smiled at that thought, quietly, so I wouldn't wake up the man whose snoring had accidentally started this entire conversation inside my head. Funny, sometimes the smallest annoyance opens the biggest door. It wasn't really about the snoring anymore. It was about something much deeper. Somewhere, without even noticing, I'd started treating my own comfort like it was optional. And maybe that was the real problem. The next morning, I made coffee with the determination of a woman who had slept just enough to function, but not enough to forgive anyone. My husband walked into the kitchen looking suspiciously cheerful. "Morning," he said. How? How do some people wake up looking as if they spent the night floating on a cloud, while others wake up looking like they've just completed military training? He kissed me on the forehead. Did you sleep okay? Now, there are moments in every marriage when the truth is technically available, but wisdom quietly suggests another route. I looked at him. I looked at my coffee. I looked back at him. Then I smiled. I've had better nights. He nodded sympathetically. I slept great. Of course you did. I almost said it out loud. Instead, I smiled again. Funny how women become fluent in 2 languages, the one we speak and the one we edit before anyone hears it. He poured himself coffee. I had the weirdest dream. I wasn't listening anymore. Not because I didn't care, because my brain had suddenly remembered something else the older woman had said after everyone stopped laughing. Another woman had asked her, "So, what would you do differently?" She didn't answer right away. She stirred her coffee for what felt like forever. Then she said, "I would have stopped pretending that being tired all the time was normal." That sentence bothered me more than the first one, because I realized I say that all the time. I'm tired, like it's my middle name. People ask how I'm doing. Tired. How was your weekend? Busy. I'm exhausted. How's work? I'm so tired. It's become such an ordinary answer that nobody even reacts anymore. What if being constantly tired isn't a personality trait? What if it's a warning we've all learned to ignore? I watched my husband making toast. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't checking 3 different things at once. He wasn't mentally planning dinner while answering emails and remembering that we were almost out of laundry detergent. He was just making toast. I felt a ridiculous wave of envy. Not because of the toast, because of the simplicity. When was the last time I'd done only one thing, without mentally carrying 12 others? Women are incredible multitaskers. Everybody says it like it's a compliment. Sometimes I wonder if it's actually a survival skill we were forced to develop, because somewhere along the way, we stopped giving ourselves permission to simply exist for 5 quiet minutes. Always planning, always remembering, always anticipating, always managing. Even lying awake in bed had become another task. Thinking, processing, preparing, replaying. I took another sip of coffee. Still hot, still too strong. Exactly the way I like it. Maybe, I thought, today I could do one tiny thing differently. Not something dramatic, not change my life. Just stop apologizing to myself for needing rest. It sounded so simple, almost embarrassingly simple, and yet I had a feeling it was going to be much harder than it looked. You know what's funny? When you're younger, you think taking care of yourself means buying a nice face cream, maybe getting a haircut, maybe finally drinking those 2 liters of water everyone keeps talking about. Then you get older, and you realize taking care of yourself is much less glamorous. Sometimes it's saying no, without writing a 3-page explanation. Sometimes it's going to bed before the dishes are done, and trusting that the world will somehow survive until morning. Spoiler alert, it usually does. That realization followed me all day. I was at the grocery store when it happened. Nothing dramatic. I was standing in front of the yogurt section staring at 2 identical containers like they held the answers to life. One had less sugar, the other had more protein. I don't even remember which one I bought, because a little girl nearby asked her mother, "Why does that lady look so tired?" Children. They don't whisper. They announce, to the entire dairy department. I instinctively smiled. The mother looked horrified. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." I laughed. "No, it's okay." Because honestly, she wasn't wrong. I did look tired. But as I walked away, I caught myself thinking something that surprised me. Not, "I should have worn concealer." Not, "I need more coffee." I thought, when was the last time someone looked at me and thought, "She looks rested"? Not beautiful, not younger, not thinner, just rested. That suddenly sounded like luxury. Real luxury. Not designer handbags, not expensive vacations, not the latest phone. 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. A quiet morning. Coffee that stays hot long enough to finish it. No guilt, no rushing, no mental checklist following you from room to room like an unpaid intern. Maybe we've been measuring success all wrong. Maybe the wealthiest woman in the room isn't the one with the biggest house. Maybe it's the one who slept well last night. I actually laughed at myself. Imagine telling 25-year-old me that one day my biggest fantasy wouldn't be a beach in Italy. It would be waking up naturally, without an alarm, without snoring, without my brain opening 17 browser tabs the second my eyes opened. Life has an incredible sense of humor. It keeps changing the definition of happiness. When I was 20, happiness meant excitement. At 30, stability. Now, honestly, silence sounds pretty amazing. Not forever, just for one good night. I got home, put away the groceries. My husband was in the living room watching television. He smiled. "How was the store?" "It was educational." He looked confused. I kissed him on the cheek and walked into the kitchen before he could ask another question. Because how exactly do you explain that a 7-year-old stranger and 3 retired women had quietly changed the way you looked at your own life? Sometimes, the biggest shifts happen so quietly, that nobody around you even notices. Except you. That evening, something unusual happened. Nothing dramatic, no life-changing conversation, no grand realization. Just, I didn't rush. Dinner was simple. Nobody complained. The dishes could wait. For the first time in years, I actually sat down after dinner without immediately looking around for the next thing that needed to be done. It's amazing how uncomfortable that feels. I lasted about 43 seconds. Then my brain started. You should wipe the counter. Did you answer Sarah's text? The laundry is still in the dryer. You forgot to order more vitamins. Honestly, if my thoughts had a manager, I'd file a complaint. I forced myself to stay on the couch. My husband looked over. You okay? I think so. You think so? I've never really tried sitting down without feeling guilty before. He laughed. I highly recommend it. Easy for him to say. Men have been professionally sitting down without guilt since the invention of furniture. I burst out laughing. A real laugh. The kind that surprises even you. He looked confused. What? Nothing. How could I possibly explain that he'd just become the unwilling representative of several thousand years of human evolution? I wasn't laughing at him. I was laughing at myself. Because somewhere along the way, I'd accepted a ridiculous belief that resting had to be earned, that unless every task was finished, I hadn't earned the right to stop. Who made that rule? Certainly not my husband. He'd never once said, "You can't sit down until everything is perfect." Actually, he'd often told me to leave things until tomorrow. I was the one saying, "No, I'll just do this one last thing," which, as every woman knows, is the biggest lie we tell ourselves. There is no one last thing. There are always 12 more. The counter, the dishwasher, the towels, the emails, the birthday card, the appointment, the groceries. Life has an endless talent for creating one more thing. Maybe the older woman wasn't talking only about sleep. Maybe she was talking about permission. Permission to stop. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to leave a few things unfinished without feeling like you failed some invisible exam. I looked around the living room. Nothing had fallen apart. Nobody was hungry. Nobody was upset. The world had continued spinning, even though I hadn't emptied the dishwasher immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. I leaned back, closed my eyes, for maybe 30 seconds. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't meditation. It was simply nothing. And I realized something almost embarrassing. I couldn't remember the last time I'd allowed myself to do absolutely nothing without trying to justify it. Maybe that's why those women stayed in my head. They weren't giving advice. They weren't trying to teach anyone. They were simply talking honestly. And somehow, honesty has become surprisingly rare, especially the kind we offer ourselves. That night, I reached for the earplugs. Then I stopped. Not because I'd suddenly become some enlightened woman who had made peace with snoring. Let's not get carried away. I simply held them in my hand for a second. Funny little things. 5 years ago, if someone had told me that I'd someday own a collection of earplugs, I'd have laughed. 5 years before that, I would have thought separate bedrooms were the beginning of the end. Now I think they were probably invented by one exhausted woman who finally said, "I love you, but I also love REM sleep." Honestly, I owe that woman flowers, or at least a thank you card. You know what's interesting? We romanticize sacrifice, especially women's sacrifice. Movies do it, books do it, families do it. Society practically hands us medals for quietly putting ourselves last. She's such a devoted wife, such a wonderful mother. She never thinks about herself. And everyone says it like it's the highest compliment imaginable. But what if that's not actually healthy? What if constantly coming last isn't love? What if it's just a habit we've inherited from generations of women before us? I thought about my grandmother. She never sat down while everyone else was still eating. Never. She served. She refilled plates. She cleared the table. Then she finally ate, usually after everyone else had finished. At the time, I thought she was amazing. Now, I wonder if anyone ever asked her, "Grandma, would you like to eat while your food is still warm?" Maybe they did. Maybe she answered, "Oh, I'm fine." Women say those three words so often. I'm fine. I'm okay. Don't worry. Sometimes I think those are the most dishonest sentences we've ever invented. Not because we're lying to other people, because we're lying to ourselves. We're translating our real thoughts into something easier for everyone else to hear. I'm tired becomes, I'm fine. I need help becomes, I'll do it. I don't have the energy becomes, it's okay. When did we learn that language? Who taught us? No, a better question. Who benefits from it? Certainly not us. I looked over at my husband again, still asleep, still snoring, completely unaware that he'd accidentally inspired the biggest internal conversation I'd had in years. Poor man. Tomorrow morning, he'll probably wake up wondering why I'm looking at him differently. He'll think it's because of the snoring. He'll be wrong. It's because, somewhere between 2 in the morning and sunrise, I realized I'd spent years trying to become the easiest person for everyone else to live with, without ever asking whether I had become easy to live with for myself. That thought was much louder than his snoring ever could be. The next morning, I did something completely out of character. I didn't make the bed. I know. Please try to stay calm. The world survived. The ceiling didn't collapse. Nobody called the authorities. I simply looked at it and thought, it can wait. Then I made my coffee. Not while unloading the dishwasher, not while checking emails, not while mentally planning dinner, just coffee. I sat down by the window. The mug was warm. The house was quiet. Even my husband was still asleep. I took one sip, then another. It was probably the first cup of coffee I'd actually tasted in weeks, maybe months, maybe years. It's strange how easily life becomes automatic. You stop noticing the little things because you're constantly preparing for the next big thing, the next appointment, the next bill, the next family gathering, the next birthday, the next problem. And while you're busy preparing for life, life quietly keeps happening without you. I remembered something my mother used to say. When you're young, you think life starts later. She was right. At 20, you think life starts after graduation, then after your first job, then after the wedding, after the baby, after the promotion, after the mortgage, after retirement, always after something. Nobody tells you that one morning you'll wake up and realize, this is it. This ordinary Tuesday, this coffee, this messy kitchen, this snoring man sleeping upstairs. This is your life. Not the rehearsal, not the waiting room, the real thing. And suddenly, that ordinary life becomes incredibly precious. I don't want to waste it being permanently exhausted. I don't want to collect years the way some people collect old receipts, keeping everything, using almost nothing. I want to remember how this coffee tasted. I want to remember laughing at ridiculous things. I want to remember that my husband, despite sounding like an old diesel engine every night, is still the same man who once drove across town because I casually mentioned craving strawberry pie. He didn't even like strawberry pie. He just wanted to see me smile. Funny how the brain works. When we're tired, it shows us everything that's wrong. When we slow down, it quietly reminds us of everything that's still beautiful. Maybe that's what those women had really given me. Not advice, perspective. They weren't warning me about marriage. They were warning me about disappearing inside it. And those are two very different things. For the first time in days, I wasn't thinking about the snoring anymore. I was thinking about myself. Not selfishly, simply honestly. Maybe that's where taking care of yourself actually begins. Not with vitamins, not with face creams, not even with 8 hours of sleep. Maybe it begins the moment you finally admit, I'm tired. And this time, you don't edit the sentence. That night, I didn't wait until I was angry. That was new. Usually by bedtime, I'd already been collecting tiny annoyances all day, not because anyone had done anything terrible, because little things have a habit of piling up when you never empty the emotional trash can. I was brushing my teeth when he walked into the bathroom. He looked at me through the mirror. What? What do you mean, what? You're thinking. How do you know? Because you've been brushing the same 3 teeth for about 2 minutes. I looked down. He was right. I've been thinking. Is it about us? I smiled. No. He visibly relaxed. That made me laugh. Should I be offended? No, but now I'm curious. I rinsed my mouth, put the toothbrush down. Then I asked something I'd never asked before. Can I tell you something without you trying to fix it? He blinked. I think so. No advice. Okay. No solutions. All right. And don't apologize before I even finish. He looked genuinely nervous now. I suddenly feel like I'm taking an exam. You kind of are. He laughed. So, go ahead. I leaned against the sink. You know, this isn't really about your snoring. I had a feeling. It's about me. He didn't interrupt. I've spent so many years making sure everyone around me was comfortable. I forgot to ask myself whether I was. Silence. Not awkward silence, the kind that gives words room to breathe. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know you felt that way. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled, because I finally had an honest answer. Because I didn't know either. That sentence surprised both of us. I hadn't been hiding it. I hadn't been pretending. I'd simply been living on autopilot, doing what needed to be done, being who everyone needed me to be. Until 3 older women, 1 sleepless night and 1 very loud husband, accidentally interrupted that autopilot. He stepped closer. So, what? What do we do now? I shrugged. I honestly don't know. Then I laughed. But I think it starts with me buying better earplugs. He laughed too. And maybe you seeing a sleep specialist. He froze. A sleep specialist? Yes. I thought this conversation wasn't about my snoring. It isn't. But your snoring is still absolutely terrible. He burst out laughing. So we're back to blaming me. No. I reached for his hand. We're finally talking. And somehow, that felt like the first good night's sleep, even before either of us had gone to bed. That night, I still woke up once. Old habits don't disappear just because you had one honest conversation. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. The house was quiet. Then, there it was, the first snore. I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. Funny, 24 hours earlier, that exact same sound had felt like an attack. Now, it sounded familiar. Annoying, absolutely, but familiar. I reached toward my nightstand. My fingers touched the little box with the earplugs. Next to it, my reading glasses, the vitamins I keep forgetting to take, the lip balm that's somehow always missing until winter. I laughed quietly. My nightstand had become a timeline. Every object represented another version of me. The woman who thought wrinkles were the biggest problem. The woman who discovered back pain. The woman who suddenly cared about magnesium. The woman who bought earplugs. Maybe getting older isn't about collecting years. Maybe it's about collecting little negotiations with reality. Some graceful, some ridiculous, some funny enough to tell later. I looked at my husband, still sleeping, still snoring, still completely unaware that he'd been the main character in a story he'd never even heard. Tomorrow morning, he'd probably ask, "Did you sleep better?" And for the first time, I wouldn't automatically answer, "I'm fine." Maybe I'd say, "A little," or "Not really," or maybe, "I think I'm figuring something out." Because that's another thing I've learned. The people who love us aren't mind readers. They can't hear the conversations we keep having inside our own heads, especially the ones we've edited so many times that even we forget what the original sentence sounded like. Maybe that's what happened to me. Not just this week, not just this year. Little by little, I'd become an edited version of myself. Softer, more convenient, less demanding. Always saying, "It's okay. I don't mind. I'm fine." Until one sleepless night made me realize I did mind. I wasn't always fine. And admitting that didn't make me a bad wife. It didn't make me selfish. It made me honest. Maybe honesty isn't loud. Maybe it doesn't arrive during dramatic arguments or life-changing moments. Maybe it arrives at 2:43 in the morning, when the whole world is asleep, except one woman, listening to a man she still loves, finally listening to herself. If you're wondering, yes, I bought better earplugs. He booked an appointment with a sleep specialist. Neither of those things magically fixed our marriage, because our marriage wasn't broken. What changed was much smaller and much more important. I stopped believing that loving someone meant quietly disappearing. I finally understood that taking care of myself wasn't something I had to earn. It wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility to myself. And maybe that's the strange gift hidden inside something as ordinary as a sleepless night. Not every bad night is trying to steal your rest. Sometimes it's trying to wake up a part of you that has been sleeping for years. Thank you for listening. I'll tell you something else when I'm ready.